What was the first big news event that you remember hearing or watching as a child? The Berlin Wall coming down. It was also the first time I heard the expression "holy shit" uttered. Black kids being allowed to join our school. I was in 5th grade and grew up in apartheid South Africa. Crazy stuff to happen in our lifetime. I'm only 42. Gas crisis in the 70s. Don't understand it, but remember seeing cars lined up at gas stations on the news. Disaster of 1989. This happened when I was in kindergarten and it was all over the news. I didn't quite understand at the time. When they were talking on the news about a planned explosion, I was scared to death of the tree outside of our house. 9/11, the classic millennial answer. Edit before even more people keep swarming me with the same thing, the classic later millennial answer. I came down for breakfast and my mother was crying at the table watching the Today Lenin had been killed. The huge fireworks in 1976. Oil embargoes in the news all the time. It becoming the 80s. Mount St. Helens erupting, putting ash on everything in our neighborhood hundreds of miles away. Thriller, baby Jessica being stuck in a pipe and the rescue around it. Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm. First big world news event that I clearly remember. 1991. This is very local, but I also remember the news from when a tornado ripped through a trailer park in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada in 1987. It was labeled Black Friday. I think for me it was the killing of Bin Laden, although I really don't remember much big things I saw on the news when I was younger. Oklahoma City bombing, but I remember a ceremony that was held at my school more than the news coverage. I remember watching the O.J. Simpson chase and seeing JonBenet Ramsey's face everywhere. Princess Diana's death. I vividly remember watching her funeral as a young kid and the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. I was the same age as her, so my parents talked about her a lot. The first moon landing. I watched it on a black and white TV. Was living in a small market town in Somerset, UK. I was 7 at the time and I don't think I appreciated the enormity of the event. When baby Jessica fell down the well. My parents took my older sisters and I to a fair the second night she was down there. They ended up having to carry 5-year-old me around the whole night because I was too anxious and distraught to enjoy any snacks, games, or rides. Sadly, the Dunblane massacre. I was the same age as the kids and was also in PE that day. I don't really remember the news itself, just my mom crying so much when she got home and hugging me very tightly. In the days following, lighting candles in church and at home in remembrance. I'm Scottish BTW for context. The fall of the Berlin Wall. To be totally honest, I was only 4 and I had no idea what was truly happening and how significant it was. However, my mom was so focused on the news that she totally forgot my bedtime for a whole hour. As a 4-year-old that hated going to bed, that was amazing. The fall of the Berlin Wall. First time I remember my parents letting me stay up late to watch the news and telling me it was history happening in front of our eyes. The Jim Jones tragedy. I was walking through the living room when the news showed all those people and asked my parents, "Are those people dead?" and was rushed out of the room. I've never forgotten the image. Loma Prieta earthquake. I was 6 and we were watching the World Series and all of a sudden chaos ensued. The war in Kosovo, and there was some war in Africa that I distinctly remember seeing a toddler with a distended tummy and flies all over. Early 90s. 9/11. I was in 2nd grade and trying to understand what was happening was hard for me to wrap my 7-year-old mind around. Challenger explosion. Teachers all brought our kindergarten class into the cafeteria to watch. Then boom boom. Teachers all rushed in a panic to shut off the TV and usher everyone to their homerooms. I can't remember anything about their response. But I remember watching that on the TV card and teachers scrambling. I can't even remember my teacher's name. The fall of the Berlin Wall. I remember an episode of Alvin and the Chipmunks where they sang about it. Lol. JonBenet Ramsey. I'd only just turned 5, so close in age to this poor girl. My grandma was obsessed with the case and it really stuck with me. Closely after was Princess Diana, Obama getting elected when I was 5. My mom would look at the projections every morning leading up to it and I remember her celebrating when he won. I was way too young to understand politics at all, but I knew him being the first black president was a big deal. Adam Walsh. My mother and grandmothers always made sure that we knew we'd end up decapitated if we ever wandered off in a store. The disappearance of Maddie McCann. I don't remember much of it. I just remember all the news channels showing the same photos and videos of her. Watergate. I don't remember much of the details, except that it was on TV all the time. Not like when news became cable channels, but it was still everywhere it seemed. Columbine. Might have been slanted since I was living nearby in Denver suburbs, but it was constant and traumatized me as a little kid for sure. They showed it all on repeat. I have extremely vague memories of 9/11. I was watching TV while my mom got ready for work or something, and when she came out I told her I didn't really like this TV show. That was just before my 4th birthday. After that, I suppose the first event I really remember was watching stuff about Hurricane Katrina. The first biggest news event that I fully understood was probably Obama's election. From top of my memory, Michael Jackson's death. I don't remember much about the news itself, how I reacted, etc. But I remember standing in front of TV and being quite amazed by his white suit and Smooth Criminal. It looked so good. I probably didn't understand half of what was happening lol, but Smooth Criminal is definitely a highlight of my memory. Reagan getting shot. I was 9 going on 10 and ticked off because my after-school shows were all preempted by the news. Everyone worried that computers and the internet wouldn't be able to switch to the 21st century. It felt like something big was about to happen and then nothing happened. Landing on the moon. I was 7. We all gathered at a neighbor's house to watch it. They had the biggest TV in the neighborhood. I vividly remember watching the OJ trial at my grandma's while eating SpaghettiOs. I don't think she was aware I was paying attention. I would have been 5 or 6 depending on when in the trial timeline that was. The hostages being released from Iran. What I really remember about it, though, was how much my parents hated Reagan and knew he likely delayed the release so that it would look like he is the one who made it happen. 9/11. I was 8 and my birthday is 9/10. That year we had to celebrate on the 11th because my dad couldn't get off work. Needless to say, there was no celebrating my birthday that year. Oklahoma City bombing. I didn't know what happened. I just knew it was bad. I can still see news footage of firefighters carrying children from the rubble. O.J. Simpson trial. I vividly remember the Bronco in the news, for whatever odd reason that has stuck in my mind. Lol. This happened when I was 4 years old. I can remember my mother crying as we watched the TV news. The Apollo 11 moon landings. We watched on a black and white TV. The next day, my mom and I went outside and looked up at the moon. I had it in my head that I would be able to see Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin waving to me from the moon. Halley's Comet. It was talked about everywhere, it was even on the cover of my kindergarten yearbook. People talked about it with such wonder and reverence, almost like it were a spiritual visitation, and I never got to see the friggin' thing when I had the chance. The eruption of Mount St. Helens. We lived on the opposite side of the country and I wasn't even in kindergarten. My mom had the early morning cartoons on for me while she was cleaning up the kitchen from breakfast and the news alert interrupted Rocky and Bullwinkle. I remember feeling scared for the first time and trying to understand how. I vaguely remember seeing footage of the Oklahoma City bombing on TV and my family talking about it. I would have been like 2.5 or 3 at the time. I think it was when there was a gruesome double homicide in my very small, very rural hometown in central Kansas. Something that was just so out of place for our little town. I can probably still find an article. I also remember there being news of a wolf or other dangerous predator on the loose, but that may have been a trick from my parents or grandparents. Selena Quintanilla dying. Watching that on Univision, not understanding why someone would want to murder her. The whole class crying the next day together. The massacre at Ecole Polytechnique. Robert Kennedy's assassination. They interrupt my cartoons and so I woke my mom up telling her that President Kennedy was shot. She said she knew that since that happened years ago. My confusion and their confusion heightened my memory. For me it was US Airways Flight 1549 emergency landing in the Hudson River. 100 people survived, 0 casualties. What a miracle. I was like 6 years old at the time. O.J. Simpson trial. I was in 4th grade. All of the teachers crowded us into the library because they wanted to watch the verdict come down. Which meant all of us small children also watched the verdict come down. The 90s are a trip. The Bosnian War. I remember seeing men being taken from their families' villages and shot. I remember my dad wrongly predicting World War III and being terrified. There were a few in succession. Elvis died in '77. The American hostages taken in Iran in 1979. A failed rescue attempt of those hostages in 1980 that killed 5 US military personnel. John Lennon was shot and killed in 1980. President Ronald Reagan was shot and injured in 1981. Pac-Man fever in 1982. The 1995 Quebec referendum. My family nearly became Torontonians that day. Luckily tragedy was avoided by the narrowest of margins and we didn't have to move to Toronto. Chernobyl. I was 5 and remember that I wasn't allowed to go out for a while or eat fruits from the garden that year. Update Challenger explosion seen it in another post and I definitely remember that, too. Casey Anthony's trial for killing her daughter. I was 7 when it happened. I didn't understand much when it happened, I just knew that it was bad. Oklahoma City bombing. I remember watching it on the news but not understanding the motives behind it. Baby Jessica in the well, the plane crash in the icy Potomac River, hostages taking over a plane in the 80s. Oh, Challenger explosion 8th grade, and Reagan assassination attempt. 3 Mile Island 7 years old. I'm old. George Bush Sr. getting elected. Remember sitting on the living room floor with my dad watching TV waiting for the election results. They hit the Pentagon. I wasn't alive during this, but they wouldn't stop talking about it. I'm a 2003 baby. I know 9/11 happened when I was a child, but I don't think I was quite old enough to remember it happening. But I do remember when Obama became president. Homesick for the Challenger disaster. Had to write a report about Chernobyl. Dad was deployed during Desert Storm. I also remember the Bernard Goetz and Central Park jogger cases. The Aurora Theater mass shooting was the first one that came to mind. I remember Osama assassination, but didn't really understand it. Probably the first space shuttle that crashed, the one with the teacher on it. They actually brought a TV into the classroom so we could watch the news coverage of the takeoff and then bam! In the 5th grade my teacher sat us all down and explained what had just happened with the Twin Towers. Cuban Missile Crisis. I was 11. Although I do recall the Nixon-Kennedy debates in 1960 if that counts.